Okay, beautiful. All righty. So first of all, Tzkushanim Rabot. Great to see everybody. I'm not going to see. Let's see what we got here. Okay. All right, everybody, please mute. So we'll be all set. Okay. Hang on one second. Okay. Okay. Good. Great. All righty. So we wanted to touch on something that is particularly interesting this year. We have the rare occurrence of Rosh Hashanah falling on Shabbat. And our rabbis have some very interesting things to say about this. So I want to touch on that within the broader context of what we'll highlight. I'm not sure why I'm still getting some feedback here, but okay. Okay. So the Minhat Ani, it's a wonderful sefer that deals with the Parashiot HaShavua and deals with them on a number of levels. It's Pshat, Dirash, and Kabbalah. Very interesting composite of perspectives that he brings on each of the Parashiot in the Chumash. And he has something very exciting on Parashat Azinu that a friend of mine mentioned to me a few days ago, and I was thrilled to see. He says that on the years when Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbat, those were some of the most difficult years in Jewish history, and those were some of the most wonderful years in Jewish history. And he goes back in time, and he works the dates to zero in on the following. The 2 years that the Churban HaBayit happened on, the destruction of the temple, were those years when Rosh Hashanah fell on Shabbat. When the first temple was destroyed, Rosh Hashanah fell on Shabbat. And when the second temple was destroyed, according to the Minhat Ani, Rosh Hashanah fell on Shabbat. He then looks at some further, goes back historically, and finds that Rosh Hashanah also fell on Shabbat on 3 very successful years. And those were the year that HaKadosh Baruch Hu forgives the Jewish people for the sin of the golden calf. Rosh Hashanah fell on Shabbat. The year that the Mishkan was consecrated for the first time, second year in the desert, Rosh Hashanah fell on Shabbat.
So was it's food or just like appetizers type?
Gail, you have to mute yourself.
Yeah, it'll be like a dinner. Not crazy.
Yeah, whatever. Don't worry, man.
Okay. And the year that the Jewish people got into the land of Israel, Rosh Hashanah fell on Shabbat. So you have this extraordinary situation where sometimes when you have this unique occurrence, it bodes very well, and other times it's the opposite. So in order to identify the idea behind it, the rabbi tells the following story. He says that there was a story of a minister in ancient times who ran afoul of the king. And the minister is called before the court, and the court is about to consider his situation. But none of those witnesses who were going to advocate on behalf of the minister show up, are willing to show up. So here he is a few days before his court date. Everything hangs in the balance, and no one is willing to come and be his sanhedor, be his attorney on his behalf, to present on his behalf. So he turns to his wife, and he says, "What should I do?" She tells him, "Well, we have a beautiful marriage. for many years. I can say good things about you. I'll present on your behalf. Sereni says, okay. A woman presenting in an ancient court is very rare and almost never would occur. But look, we have no choice. Please be my advocate. And she stands before the king and she talks to him about his kindness and his compassion and his patience and his understanding and how their love evolved and changed over years and how he gave to their children, how he supported them. And she goes on with one anecdote and one story followed by the other. And the king reasons and he thinks and he says, you know what? A woman never comes before the court, but you know what? Let's see. I'm going to consider her words, and he ends up forgiving the minister. A few years later, similar situation, where another minister runs afoul of the king. In this case, here again, no one was willing to come before him and advocate on his behalf. So he goes to his wife and he says, will you advocate on my behalf? In this case, the situation was very different. In this case, please, whoever isn't muted, please mute. In this case, the situation was very different in that this man was abusive to his wife. Physically, literally physically abusive. But in this case, he says, well, the last minister pulled it off. I'll do the same. And well, I have no choice. And look, it worked the last time. It should work this time. In this case, the woman shows up at the court. And the first thing the king notices is the bruise on the side of her eye. And the second thing he notices is her limp from the leg that was badly bruised from when he hit her in the leg.
Oh, God.
And then she attempts to tell stories, positive stories. It's clear from her stories, the underlying message is clear, that this is an abusive person who was never good to her. And any advocacy that she might have presented on his behalf goes the other way. The king rules against the minister, and the minister is dismissed. So our rabbis say the following. On a typical Rosh Hashanah, our advocate, our Melitz Yosher, the one who stands before God, so to speak, to shake the walls of the heavens and to force the gates open, is the shofar. But certain years that are even more eventful, that are even more significant, it's not the shofar. It's the strongest partner that the Jewish people have, Shabbat, that stands before God to advocate on the Jewish people's behalf. And how will the advocacy go? How it went with either of the wives. If the Jewish people, the rabbi says, have kept the Shabbat and loved the Shabbat, then Shabbat can stand before God and advocate positively. If, the rabbi says, the Jewish people have cared less about the Shabbat, have been abusive to her on some level, well then, any advocacy that Shabbat presents will be seen through. And the year Lo Aleinu would not be a positive, but would be otherwise. So here we are at this remarkable time. We know that the world doesn't progress with a lack of mastery and a lack of control. We know that the world doesn't progress in a chaotic fashion. Rather, we know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the master of the world and is involved in all that we do and everything that we do. We know that in 3 months, essentially from March to June, 3 months, 4 months, the entire world order was completely and unequivocally disrupted. We've seen an upheaval in the world order that has never been seen in modern human history. It's being quantified in human lives. It's being quantified in trillions and trillions of dollars. It's being quantified in one company after another folding its doors, in new lifestyles. It's beyond extraordinary. Now, there were situations like this, as we understand, 100 years ago and 250 years ago with plagues that hit the world. But never has anything destabilized the entire world order to this extent in 120 days. It's absolutely spectacular. We, as the center of God's focus, need to take particular notice of what's going on. Many of us know, and we've spoken about this in some of the other classes, that despite the fact, and although most people are earning less money than before, most have a quality of life that's maybe never been this good. Maybe many of us feel a sense of love for those in our lives more than we've ever felt. Standing on the porch in the early days with the inability to hug a child caused us to appreciate and love that child maybe more than we ever did before. Being at home with those children or with a spouse enabled us to build relationships, to share, to find new areas of communication. Our free time, the time we couldn't spend going into the city, enabled us to reconnect to learning. Remarkably, for the larger Jewish organizations in the world, they never collected as much money as they did during Corona, even though no one was making money. How is that possible? How is it that it cracked open this wellspring of chesed and tzedakah and learning? I don't believe most people will say that there was never this level of learning ever in Jewish history. Never this many people learning Torah. So, what do we have going on? We have the most remarkable world occurrence in modern history, maybe in world history, dovetailed by a Rosh Hashanah that Shabbat falls on. It has to be that this is a time that will be reflected upon as no other. It becomes, how do we reflect on it? So I want to tell you a couple of stories. I met someone a few weeks ago who was a driver for, I met someone a few weeks ago who was a New Jersey state trooper. He's been on the force for a number of years, 42 years old, and he's a lieutenant, which is a very high office within the state troopers. And he chose a handful of years ago to direct his efforts in an area of the emotional well-being of the troopers. It seems, and we've heard about this, but I didn't understand it until it was said to me face to face, that there have been more police officers that have died as a result of suicide than have died in the order of duty, in the line of duty.
Wow.
More police officers have died by suicide than have died in the line of duty. In fact, he pointed out to the Raritan Bridge, and he said, you see the bridge? That's where many of them jump. They jump off the bridge over here. And I asked him, I said, Phil, how could that be? These are the people who have chosen to serve, chosen to protect. He said, it's true. But when you hold, God forbid, a dying child in your arms, when you break into an apartment and see an abused lady, when you go up to a car and you don't know what's going to greet you in terms of a firearm, when you're denounced and you're yelled at, he said, on and on and on. He said, this is an epidemic within law enforcement. So he decided a handful of years ago to direct his efforts to the emotional well-being and the counseling of men in the New Jersey State Troopers. Fine. But he told me, he said, Ricky, I have 2 children. I don't know how to guide them. I don't know how to protect them. They see everything. They're subject to everything. There are no more core principles in the world. The core principles of religion that were the grounding principles of America have been trashed. The core principles of morality have been made relative. Everybody's morality makes sense. Person has a anger issue, he can steal or rob or destroy somebody else's property arbitrarily and essentially without recourse. He said, so what do I do? How do I teach? What do I teach? How do I protect my children? I didn't have an answer for him. Another person, a lady I met about a week ago, in her late 20s, divorced with a 7-year-old child. We know that 1 out of every 2 Americans gets divorced. 1 out of every 2 Americans, 50%. That means when an average American chooses to commit himself or herself to dedicate his life to another human being or hers, chances are 1 out of 2 that that relationship is going to end. This is an American tragedy. This lady, unfortunately, was part of that situation, and she's 27 years old. And we spoke a little bit, and she said, how do I find another person? And if I do, how do I build with that person? How do I establish who that person is? How do I really know his or her core values? How do I know where they come from? How do I get married again? So here, this young lady, a senior officer in a large corporation here in the States, is at a place of despair and loss, not knowing where and how. And then you take a step back and you say, wait a second, I'm Jewish, I'm Halabi, I'm Syrian, I'm in the community in Brooklyn, Deal, New York. 1 second. I have core values. I have Torah. I have halakha. I have community. I have family. They have none of this. We have all of it. We didn't simply get Torah and halakha. We got Torah, halakha, community, family. A lot of Jewish people who have Torah and halakha don't have community and family. We hit the trifecta. For some reason, we don't know why. We didn't choose to be put in the community. We didn't choose to be born this time in America. We could have been in Idaho, part of a Jewish community, or in Wyoming, or in California. Or guess what? We could have been in other parts of Brooklyn or Queens where the intermarriage rate in those areas is 70%. We were placed in this unique situation, absolutely unique situation, as opposed to that young, superb person, superb state trooper who has sacrificed and continues to sacrifice immeasurably for the people who cares about and doesn't know how he's going to guide his children. We know. And yeah, are we concerned sometimes that our children are a little bit this way, a little bit that way? Of course we are, and we should be. And do we worry about our children forever and ever and ever, no matter their age? Of course we do. But we never have absolute crisis to say how. We immediately look to Torah. We immediately look to our leaders. We immediately look to our community. We immediately look to our family. We're absolutely grounded layer upon layer upon layer. What does that mean? It's back to the Shabbat story. We have the privilege of being able to live a certain way. And in terms of the specific context of this year, to treat Shabbat a certain way, to treat learning a certain way. We have the privilege. We're not searching in a panicked state to find what we can to ground ourselves and our children. We have it all. For us, because we've been blessed with it all, the demands in us are that much greater. And as we mentioned, a few of us last time, the demands on a person change and evolve. So let's just pull the pieces together so far. A, this is a unique year. It's a year when Shabbat, when Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbat. As the Minhat Ani says, those years are years when we have to take particular notice, because that means that Shabbat will be the Meritz Yosher. Shabbat and how we treat Shabbat will be the advocate, will take the place of the shofar standing in front of God. And if we treat the Shabbat with care, with knowledge, with understanding, with learning, knowing the halachot, knowing what we should do, dressing properly, enjoying it as a separate and distinct day, then it has the ability to stand before us, before God, for us, and advocate on our behalf. That's what we want to be doing. But we have to take it further. People who are just as nice as we are, just as kind as we are, weren't born into our circumstances, don't have the great good fortune of having Torah, of having Shabbat, of having halacha, of having learning, and they're lost, and they don't know where to go. And these two people I mentioned are an example of millions of people in this great country and others who are absolutely frightened and don't know what to do and from where to get their anchor. That means for us, when we have this great good fortune, we have to show gratitude. And what is gratitude in Judaism? Gratitude in Judaism is involvement and commitment. Gratitude in Judaism, not just saying, I love God, I believe in God. Thank you, God, for making me one of the chosen few. That's very nice. But that's not serious. What's serious is I appreciate that Shabbat is my partner, for example. And if I partner with it, I'll make this year the year for me. And if I don't, if I ignore it, if I disdain it, if I abuse it, then the year might be different for me. So, A, let's appreciate and value what we have. As I've said before in other contexts, we're not the 1%. It's not true. It's much more than that. We're the 1% of the 1%. We are the most privileged people you could be. And that means that we have a responsibility to that privilege. We have a responsibility to learn more, to do more, to grow more, to know more. I mean, let's put it in our own context, right? As parents and grandparents. You give a child all that you can give them, everything, right? And let's say that's a lot more than other children get. Or even if it isn't, you give him everything. What do you want? The child can say thank you, but if the thank you isn't accompanied by exemplary behavior, by behavior that says, I see what you gave me, Daddy, I understand what you did for me, Mommy, and I'm going to live my life a certain way as a result of that. That's what we expect. When we give to our children and we guide them and we love them and we teach them the way God does to us, we assume and expect that they're going to take what we gave them and they're going to be growing with it every day, doing more, becoming closer to the values that we presented. God is looking for the same thing. Part A of tonight is Shabbat, Rosh Hashanah, Corona, It can be a benign period, it can be a nuisance period, or it can be the beginning of another stage in life based on the fact that the only things that remained in our control during the peak of Corona were those things that are essential. Everything else, anything tangential, travel, business, money, whatever it be, was taken away from us. The only thing that was kept to us were Torah, Chesed, and relationships. If we hold on to those and we build on those practical, real efforts, we will take this remarkable year of Corona and Shabbat, Shana, and make it be something very, very important. A year of absolute and unequivocal growth. And I want to make the other point again. We made this last time, but I just want to reiterate it briefly, and that is that at different stages in life, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants different things. So as we get ready to say the Vidui in a couple of days, we have to take a few minutes and do the following. A, where am I at this stage in my life? B, where do I want to put my focus and efforts? And C, therefore, what are the areas in me that I have to fix and change? Maybe last year it was kashrut. Maybe this year it's Shabbat. Maybe last year it was Ben Adam Haviro, between man and man. Maybe this year it's between man and God. I saw something fascinating recently, and in all honesty, I never thought about it, but it's so true. I saw a ma'amad that said that anybody who goes into business has to study the areas of Choshen Mishpat that relate to business. Because how could you go into business without knowing the halachot of interest, of contractual law, of buying and selling? Wow, I've been in business a long time. I studied these things tangentially. I never studied them deeply and seriously. Well, you know what? Maybe at this point, because my business efforts don't only include me, but include my sons as well, maybe now the focus on business halacha has to become primary. Let's talk about one other area and then we'll wrap up. When someone involves himself in Teshuva in a serious way, the results are very profound and impactful and serious. And it's important to know going into Yom Kippur what the results are of sincere efforts. The first, as we know, is called kapara. Kapara is the removal of the need for punishment. So if someone did something wrong, and he makes teshuvah, meaning he takes stock on where he is and where he wants to go, and acknowledges the areas that he's failed in, drills down to the core reasons, and makes a plan to move forward. So now there's no need for punishment, because the person already acknowledged where he is and how he has to change. So God doesn't have to push him around at all to get him moving forward. The second, and I think this is even more important, according to Harambam, what happens when a person acknowledges where he is and what he's building towards is tahara. Now, tahara, I think, is maybe the most important. Tahara is a cleansing where whatever dirtied the person, whatever confused the person, whatever lowered the person as the human being he wants to be, whatever made him less than brilliantly clear and shining and bright, whatever clouded him is removed. He's purified. That, I think, is very serious and profound, because we know when we feel great about ourselves, when we feel pure, when we feel cleansed, when we don't feel dirtied by actions that we regret. So our rabbis say, led by Harambam, that when a person goes through the process of appreciating what he has, acting on it, confronting where he is, anticipating where he wants to go, anticipating and articulating the areas he needs to fix, then he expunges from himself anything dirty that was hanging on to him as a result of past actions. The next thing that happens is sadicha, which means that not only is the need for punishment removed, not only is the person's sanctity and purity restored, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu is finished with this thing. He's finished with whatever happened. Wait a second. A person did a certain thing 10 times, several times. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wipes them all out? Absolutely. Wipes it all out. It's not part of my book anymore. Now, those of us who have been on the planet for a period of time, just about all of us on this call, know that it's not easy to step away from things. It's not easy to move beyond things in our own hearts, in our own minds. There are things we can carry with ourselves for a long period of time. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, no need. You move beyond it. You articulated what happened, why, and how you're getting out of it for the future. Your purity has been restored, and I completely forgive you, and it's no longer part of who you are. No less important is mechila. What does mechila mean? That any distance that was caused between the person and HaKadosh Baruch Hu as a result of the action, any distance is erased. Let's just use a quick example. If someone did something hurtful to somebody else, the person regrets it. Even if he regrets it, but they haven't cleaned it up, then each of them is going to feel a sense of distance. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, listen, I don't need you to even correct the action. All I need you to do is to take notice of it, acknowledge it, make a commitment to move away from it deeply and seriously, expunge any of the negative, and then we become one again. And many of us at our stage in life know when we're more in sync with God and otherwise. When we're in sync with God, we feel it. We have a different energy. We have a different happiness. We have a different sense of sunshine about us. HaKadosh Baruch Hu grants us this great option of mechila. He says, not only am I going to forgive you, not only am I going to remove the need for any punishment, not only am I going to allow you to feel cleansed and clean, but we're one again. We're together again. We're in love again, as if nothing happened. Fantastic. And finally, when a person makes Teshuva, when a person understands who he is, when a person understands his great good fortune, when a person like us understands that we're the 1% of the 1%, and goes ahead and evaluates his life seriously and says, you know what? Hayom Harat Olam. It really is a new life and a new day each day, and I can recast myself. HaKadosh Baruch Hu promises an altogether new future possibility. Tikva la'atid. Wow. A new possible future. What do you mean? Isn't this my life? Aren't I jaded into a certain place? It's good, but it is what it is. It's 50 some odd years, it's 60, it's 70, it's whatever number of years. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, no. Get it together. Let your gratitude be reflected in growth and commitment to more growth, and your future possibility is absolutely open-ended. It's not stuck, it's not limited, it's not restricted. That's where we want to be. So, here we are. For some reason, we have the great good fortune to live through this unprecedented time in world history. Never before in world history has everything come crashing down in a matter of days. To live through it and be somewhat ignorant of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence here would be a great mistake. To live through it and take a long walk on the beach or in the park and say, wow, here I am. I was chosen to be here now. My possibilities are infinitely greater than I ever imagined them to be. Stop, fix, change. I can't be in the office 5 days a week anymore. I can't if I want to. What does that mean in terms of the people I love, in terms of chesed, in terms of learning? It has to mean much more, and it can. So I believe this is a Yom Kippur that none of us earned, but all of us got. None of us had the right to have, but all of us have been graciously granted. When we said Shehecheyanu on this past Rosh Hashanah, I said it in a way that I never said it before, because I never lived at a time like this before. None of us have. So I want to implore you and beg you. We have to appreciate what happened. You know, when Bnei Israel, and we'll wind up with this, when Bnei Israel experienced the splitting of the sea, and they said at that point that the most simple person had at that moment of the splitting of the sea a prophetic capacity that was as great as any prophet could have had. And then almost immediately thereafter, there was complaints and there were many rebellions against Moshe Rabbeinu and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. How does that happen? It happens because we don't make the experience permanent part of our lives. God forbid we rush back to our normal lives now. God forbid. Why? Why? We were taught more than ever before that the only thing that you really have is what's eternal. The only thing that really matters are the two things that you take with you. Your mitzvot and your gemilut chasadim. I want to tell you one final story. The story of a person who wakes up one morning in an altogether different place he'd never seen before. He had been a very active, successful business person, so he immediately looks to reclaim that which he knew. He looks for the people who worked with him. He looks to the bankers who knew him. He walks and he walks and he walks. Doesn't recognize any of the scenery, but assumes that eventually he's going to bump into someone with whom he's done business over the years. Time goes by, nothing happens. He finally gets a message that he's summoned to a court in a few days to deal with his belongings. Great. He says, finally some clarity. He gets to the court, and there's a room full of people. And the court clerk turns to him and he says, do you recognize the 50 people in the room? He says, a few of them, many of them not. Each of them stands up, and as they do, a small light shines on the person who stands, and the person briefly recounts the chesed that person did for him in his lifetime. Stands up, says a sentence or two, lowers his head to the person, and walks out of the room. One after the other, about 50 people. Very nice. The gentleman still doesn't have a clear sense of what's happening, but he's warmed by what he saw. Then the court clerk walks him through the town and takes him to another place, to a castle with a very long spiral staircase. And he walks him up to the top. He says, we're going to start here and then take a slow walk down. And with every step he takes, He's confronted with a mitzvah he did at a different point in his life, going from his oldest years down to the bottom to his youngest years. One after another, each mitzvah comes to greet him, briefly embraces him, and then moves away. And then he takes him to another place, a giant library filled with hundreds of books. And in this case, certain books are shining, are lit. And he walks over to those books and touches them. And those books remove themselves from the shelves and land in his arms, in an almost embrace between those books and the man. And when it's all done, when all the books had reintroduced themselves to him, after an experience of each of the mitzvot reintroduced themselves to him, and each of the people whom he helped reintroduced themselves to him, the court clerk holds him, hugs him, and bids him farewell. And what are we talking about? We're talking about that's his eternity. There ain't nothing else. That's his eternity. The people he helped, the mitzvot he did, and the Torah that he learned. That's everything. And you know what? That's all we got. That is all we have. I would add to it the people we love and who love us. So, this is, in my lifetime, the most remarkable and unique Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur I have ever had. I plead with all of you to look at yours the same way, to feel a great level of God's kindness, and that He enabled us to live this particular Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and Sukkot. And He enabled us to take stock of everything that's gone on and to reclaim a greater commitment than ever to those eternal things. The people we love, the people we help, the mitzvah we do, the mitzvot we do, and learning more so we can do more. I think that's the Corona Beracha. I believe it is. Rather than talking about fewer people got it, more people got it, we're praying inside, we're praying outside, we're praying sideways, we're praying backwards. All that stuff is true. But take that time and learn another halacha and reach out to a person. I got to tell you, I've become more expressive of my love to friends and acquaintances during this period than ever before. I find that I'm using the word love you more than ever before. Because I do. Because you know what? Things have been laid very raw. And people have become very vulnerable. And nothing could be better than that. So that's my message. Thoughts, questions? Anybody want to unmute? Good?
Great. That was very good.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We had a beautiful crowd tonight.
Great class.
Everybody's Mar Hatima Tova, Tizkuru Shanim
Thank
Habo.
you, Ricky.
Great
Happy
to see all of
holiday.
you. We really appreciate it.
Great
Good
to see you.
Very
Tizkuru
Thank you.
Shanim. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Great class.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ricky. Thank you.